Imagine waking up every day inside one of the most powerful empires on Earth and still having no guarantee your body would be clean by the end of it. In 1500 AD, the Inca Empire controlled millions of people across the Andes, from untouchable god kings to farmers who barely saw sunlight. But the truth about how they actually lived was far more shocking than anyone imagines. Before we start, subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The empire that touched the clouds. High in the Andes, where the air thins and the mountains seem to hold the sky in place, one of the greatest civilizations ever built had been shaping its world for centuries. By 1500 AD, the Inca Empire, known to its own people as Tawantinsuyu, the four regions, stretched across more than 4 million square kilometers along the spine of South America. Millions of people lived under its rule, connected by thousands of kilometers of precisely engineered stone roads, governed by a single ruler believed to be the living son of the sun itself. And yet beneath all that grandeur, the golden temples, the stonework that still defies modern explanation, daily life was shaped by conditions that most of us could not endure for a single day. The most basic acts of human existence: washing the body, staying clean, managing what the body produces. These were not automatic or guaranteed. They were questions of access, of belief, and above all, of where you had been born inside the rigid hierarchy that held this empire together. Because the Inca world was, before anything else, a world of profound and structured inequality. At the absolute top stood the Sapa Inca, the supreme ruler, considered the son of the sun, untouchable in every sense of the word. Below him stretched a rigid order of nobles, priests, regional governors, military commanders, and skilled artisans. And at the base of that entire pyramid, the hatunruna, the common people, the farmers and laborers, who fed and built everything around them. Between these two worlds, the difference was not simply one of wealth or power. It was a difference measured in something far more intimate, in the cleanliness of the body itself. The Sapa Inca bathed in water carried to him through carefully carved stone channels. He wore garments woven from vicuña wool, so extraordinarily fine that the first Europeans to touch it struggled to describe the sensation. Each garment was worn exactly once, then burned. His body was maintained with an attention that bordered on sacred ceremony. Dirt, disorder, and the smell of labor were kept entirely away from his presence. He was, in the eyes of his people, a god walking among men. And gods did not carry the dust of the earth on their skin. For the common man and woman, reality was something else entirely. The hatunruna rose before dawn and worked until darkness fell. They lived in small stone or adobe homes, often shared with extended family, and sometimes with animals kept close for warmth against the brutal cold of the Andes. The body was not something tended to with privacy or delicacy. It was a tool, and tools are cleaned when there is time, not when there is desire. Bathing for these people meant rivers, and in the Andes, rivers are not gentle. Fed by glacial snowmelt from peaks that never fully thaw, these rivers carry a cold that seizes the body, contracting the lungs, numbing the hands within seconds. Bathing was not a daily ritual, it was an occasional event, shaped by season, weather, and the crushing rhythm of agricultural labor. A man who had spent 14 hours tending stone terraces did not descend to a freezing river to wash himself. He lay down on hard ground. He slept, and he rose again before the sun. If the distance between a god king's private bath and a farmer's glacial river already tells you something about this empire, the next chapter goes deeper, into something that no person, rich or poor, divine or common, could avoid. How did millions of people in a civilization built on mountain stone handle something as inevitable as the body itself? The answer is more sophisticated and more brutal than you might expect. When nature calls in the city of the sun, there is something that no empire, no matter how powerful, can legislate away. No divine ruler, no stone road, no sacred ritual can stop it. Every human body, from the lowest farmer to the son of the sun himself, produces waste. Every single day. And in a civilization of millions of people packed into mountain cities, river valleys, and terraced hillsides. That biological reality became one of the most pressing challenges the Inca world ever faced. In Cusco, the imperial capital, this challenge was met with a level of organization that surprises most people. The Inca collected human waste deliberately and systematically. It was not thrown into streets or rivers without thought. Organic waste was gathered, composted, and carried to the agricultural terraces that fed the empire. In a world without chemical fertilizers, human waste was not something to be discarded. It had value. And in the Inca economy, where labor and resources flowed upward through the state, nothing of value was ever wasted. But here again, the divide between rich and poor revealed itself in the most intimate way imaginable. In Machu Picchu, the royal estate built for the Emperor Pachacuti, perched 8,000 feet above sea level, archaeologists found something remarkable. Among all the hundreds of structures on that mountain ridge, only one building had a dedicated sanitary drain built directly into its floor. One. And that building stood adjacent to the emperor's private quarters, near the first fountain in the entire water system. Because the Sapa Inca, by law and by belief, was always the first to receive pure water. His waste was managed. His body was protected. His world was engineered around his physical comfort in ways the rest of the population could not imagine. For the common people, designated waste sites were placed downhill from inhabited zones, a practical understanding that what flows downward should flow away from where people sleep and eat. This was not accident. The Inca had a real, if wordless, understanding that clean water and human waste should never share the same space. But understanding a principle and having infrastructure built around it are two entirely different things. In rural communities, and most of the empire was rural, the fields themselves became the destination. The terraces that climbed the mountainsides absorbed what the body produced. The land fed the people, and the people fed the land. But it also meant that, for the hatunruna, there was no separation between the world of labor and the most private acts of the human body. And what did they use afterward? Across the Andean world, people used what the land provided: leaves, grass, water from nearby streams. Corn husks have been documented archaeologically as a hygiene tool in pre-Columbian cultures across the Americas. Smooth river stones may have served the same purpose. In the high, dry altiplano, where vegetation was sparse and wind cut through everything, options were even fewer. None of it was comfortable. None of it was equal. Because in the Inca world, as in every world, the poor made do with what was near, while those with power had what they needed brought to them. What strikes researchers most is not the absence of solutions, but how deliberate the Inca were about separating filth from life. They may not have understood germ theory, they may not have known why contaminated water killed, but they acted as if they did, engineering drainage away from drinking sources and protecting water purity with the same seriousness they applied to the empire's borders. If the gap between the emperor and the farmer was already stark when it came to bathing and waste, the next chapter reveals something even more unsettling. What happened when the body broke down entirely, and how illness was treated in a world where medicine and the spirit were never truly separated. When the body broke. Illness in the Inca world was never just a physical event. It was a message, a disruption in the invisible balance between the human body, the natural world, and the forces that governed both. When a person fell sick, the question was never simply what had gone wrong inside the body. The question was why the world had turned against this person. What had been disturbed? What needed to be restored? This was not ignorance. It was a complete and internally consistent framework for understanding suffering, developed over centuries of living in one of the harshest environments on Earth. The Inca had healers, and they were far from simple. The most skilled were called hampikamayak, officials in charge of medicines, trained in the use of plants, minerals, and ceremony. Some diagnosed through divination and the reading of coca leaves. Others treated wounds and broken bones through poultices and physical manipulation. Others still were surgeons, wielding obsidian blades sharp enough to cut bone with a precision that would not be matched in Europe for centuries. But here, once again, the world split sharply between those who had access and those who did not. Historical chronicles are explicit. The most skilled healers were regarded as practitioners who were not supposed to cure common people, only kings, the royal family, and chiefs and their relatives. The Sapa Inca never traveled without healers at his side. When the emperor fell ill, it was treated as a crisis that endangered the entire empire. Purification rituals were performed at the Temple of the Sun. Warriors gathered to shout into the air and drive away evil spirits, and the finest medicine available anywhere in the realm was brought to his presence. For the hatunruna, healing worked differently. When someone fell ill in an ordinary community, the women of the household became the medicine. Knowledge of plants passed from mother to daughter, generation by generation, without ever being written down. Coca leaves were chewed to dull pain. Munya was brewed for digestive illness. Other plants, known only by people of specific valleys, treated fevers and infections that might otherwise kill within days. And then there was what the Inca could do with a skull. Trepanation, surgically removing bone to relieve pressure on the brain, was practiced in the Andes for over 1,000 years. What makes it remarkable is not that it was done, but how well. A study analyzing hundreds of ancient Peruvian skulls found that during the Inca period, the survival rate for this procedure reached up to 83%. During the American Civil War, centuries later, the same surgery killed nearly half of all patients. The Inca used sharp obsidian blades, performed procedures in open air, and applied herbal compounds that kept most patients alive through an operation that opened the human brain to the mountain sky. But this level of care was not for everyone. It gathered where power gathered, near the centers of the state, near the nobility, near those the empire chose to protect. The common person who suffered a head wound in a remote village had no trained surgeon. The woman who developed fever days after childbirth had no hampakameok at her side. She had her community, her plants, her prayers, and the cold Andean air pressing through the walls of her stone house. In the Inca world, the gap between the care given to the powerful and the care available to the powerless was not measured in comfort. It was measured in survival. If the divide between emperor and farmer already runs through everything in this series, through bathing, through waste, through medicine, the next chapter reveals the one daily battle that no rank or privilege could escape. Darkness, and what it meant to live without light. The world after sunset. When the sun disappeared behind the peaks of the Andes, the world did not simply grow dark. It transformed. The mountain cold descended with a weight that pressed against walls and crept beneath every door. The sky above filled with stars so dense and bright that the Inca mapped their own constellations not just from the points of light, but from the dark spaces between them. They named the shadows. They read the darkness as carefully as they read anything else in the natural world. But naming the darkness and living inside it were two very different things. For the common people of the Inca Empire, sunset marked a hard boundary, a physical limit on what was possible. Without light, the world shrank to whatever fire could reach. And fire, in the Andes of 1500 AD, was precious and not equally available to all. The primary sources of light inside a home were open fires and simple torches. Llama fat burned in small clay vessels, casting a low flickering glow across stone walls. These flames kept complete darkness away, but barely. They threw more shadow than light. They filled enclosed spaces with smoke that had nowhere to go, accumulating near the ceiling in homes with only a small opening in the thatched roof. The interior air at night was thick, warm near the fire and bitterly cold just feet away from it. In the temples and palaces of Cusco, fire burned differently. The Coricancha, the great temple of the sun, had interior surfaces lined with gold panels that caught and multiplied whatever light existed inside. Torches reflected off metal that lesser people never touched, creating an atmosphere of warmth and divine radiance, unlike anything the ordinary world could offer. Light itself was a form of power. The Sapa Inca was the son of Inti, the sun, the supreme source of all light and warmth. For the ruler's spaces to glow while the common home struggled against darkness was not contrast. It was theology made physical. The Inca believed Inti descended into his cave each evening, withdrawing his light from the world. Darkness was not neutral. It was the temporary retreat of the divine. Two gods, Yananyamka and Tutanyamka, were the twin deities of darkness and night. The spirit of the dead required a black dog to guide it through the long, dark road of the afterlife, because darkness was the domain of what had already passed from the living world. For the hatunruna, this meant the night was largely a time to stay still. Traveling after dark on mountain paths that dropped hundreds of feet on either side was not recklessness. It was something closer to death. Work stopped not because people chose rest, but because the terrain itself became lethal without light. Families gathered close to the fire, bodies pressed together for warmth as much as for company. Children fell asleep near the flame. Adults slept in the same room, on the same floor, alongside the animals that shared their shelter. Noble households had more fuel, more attendants to maintain fires through the night. Their movements after dark were supported by torchbearers, people whose labor existed specifically to extend the hours of the powerful beyond what nature allowed everyone else. When the fire went out in a common home in the middle of the night and the cold came in and the darkness was absolute, there was nothing to do but pull the family closer and wait for the son of the sun to rise again from his cave in the east. If darkness shaped the nights of this empire so completely, the next chapter asks what it meant for the body itself, for the skin, the hair, the smell of a person moving through a world with no soap, no running water, and no way to stay clean in the way we now take entirely for granted.